In this video, I'm going to talk about 7 really awesome Power Query tricks, and let me tell you, you would not regret watching this video. Trick number 2, trick number 4 are the tricks that are going to make your queries shorter, and trick number 7 is my absolute favorite. No further ado, let's start. Trick number 1, how do you dynamically reference as many queries as you would like? Take a look at this query that I'm working with. So at the moment, I have a bunch of queries in here, and for some reason, I would like to reference the queries that start with the word table. Now, this could be anything, this could be any pattern, but for now, my intention is that I somehow want to reference these 2 queries. And just in case in the future, if I have more queries that are named as table, I would like to reference those as well. How do you do such a thing? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to go ahead in the query, other sources, and create a blank query. Now I gotta write something here that references table 1 and table 2 dynamically, not a hard reference, but dynamic reference. So for that, what I'm going to do is I can put in the equals to sign and use the sections keyword. So I'll say equals to sections and press enter. This is going to create a record, which is where we have one column is section 1. But if you actually peek into the record, you're going to see that you have all the tables right here, which are mentioned inside of your queries. Now, if I just pull apart this particular column called section 1, so square bracket and I'll say section 1, this actually converts this into another record, which is where I can take a look at all of the queries. I can quickly convert this particular record into a table using this particular option in the convert tab up on the top. So click right here, this converts it into a record, and sure enough, this can now be filtered to only retain the name where table 1 and table 2 exists. So I can come in here, I can apply a text filter, and this should begin with the word table. So I can just write the word table and click on OK, and this is good to go. Now, one quick thing before we move on to the next trick, which is where we have dynamically referenced table 1 and table 2. The word table that we mentioned inside of the filtered step was with a T uppercase or T capital. Now, just in case you would like to make your query a little more robust, your filter a little more robust, that small t's and upper t's both should be considered. What you can do is in the text.start with function in of the formula bar, you can put in a comma and you can write a comparer as a nullable function. What does it mean? It means ignore case sensitivity. How do you write that? So I'm going to say that just ignore the comparer ordinal ignore case. That's what I'm going to mention, and then just commit on this. Nothing changes, but tomorrow, even if you kind of write a small t here, it is going to ignore the case and capture all the words with the name table inside of that. Let's move on to trick number 2. In case you're liking the video thus far, you're going to absolutely love my courses on Power Query, DAX, data modeling, and especially the M language, which is where I break down very complicated concepts around data cleaning and ETL, and then try to help you understand that how do you build or how do you frame logic to be able to build your solution on your own data. These are extremely structured courses, which is where I take students right from scratch, build up the fundamentals, and then we go on start talking about more advanced, more complicated problems. Hundreds of students have joined my courses and they have left some raving feedback about the course. In case you're interested to take your skills to the next level, I'll highly encourage that you take a look at the courses, and they will be super beneficial. Thanks so much. My next trick is quite practical and you can use this in multiple scenarios. Take a look at this. You would be finding yourself doing this particular thing a lot of times. So far, we have been able to reference table 1 and table 2, and here are my tables. Let's just say that I want to expand them using the magical expand button, and I do so. So I click right here on the expand button. There are a bunch of columns in here. I ignore the name prefix. I click on OK, and the tables get expanded. Couple of problems, which is where all the names of these columns, which is date, sales rep, customer, all of these columns are hard-coded. So should any column change in the tables in the previous step, this is not going to reflect that. That is problem number 1. And just in case, if I wanted to rename this particular column that got expanded additionally alongside all of these tables, I'll have to double click right here and then do the renaming. Call this as, let's say, query name. Now, can we consolidate all of this into one single step that is neat, that is clean? Yes, we can, and let me show you how. So I'm going to get rid of these 2 steps at the moment, renamed columns and expanded value, and get back to my query like the way it was. The formula that I'm going to use is going to do 2 things. It is going to expand the 2 tables with all the columns intact. That's one. And it is also going to give me the ability to carry along this column alongside give a custom name to this column. Let's just see how can we do that. I'm going to click on a new step right here. That brings a new step. I'm going to call this as combine, and I'm going to use a formula called table.fromPartition. So table.fromPartitions. I'm going to start the bracket, and in the first part of the formula, it says that, hey, are you trying to create a new column, and would you like to give that column a particular name? So yes, the column that I'm trying to create is nothing but query name, which is going to be an additional column along with the two tables which are right here. So I'm just going to go in this particular function, and I'm going to say that the name of the new column that I'm trying to create is going to be the query name. In this column that I'm creating, query name, the value is going to be this value and this value. So the renaming is done. That's part one. The next thing that I would want in this particular function, table.fromPartitions, if you just put in a comma, you will see that it asks you, it says that give me the partitions as a list. Now, when you are providing the partitions as a list, you need to make sure that every single list, so imagine that we have a list right here. Every single list should have two parts: the value that goes in the query name column, so this is the value, and the table itself. So these two values are going to form the two items of the list. So this is the first item, the table becomes the second item. Then in the next list, it's going to be the value and the table, so on and so forth. So every single row of this particular table needs to be converted into a list. How do we do that? Simple enough. I can just come in and add a new step just for temporary purposes at the moment, and I can say that, hey, here is a table and I would like to convert the rows of the table into a list. So table.fromRows function is going to take the rows of this table. That means the first row becomes the list number 1 and the second row becomes list number 2, and every single list is going to have two parts: the name of the column and the table itself that we want to combine. So table.fromRows has given us an error. Let's just go find that. What's the problem? Actually, the formula is not table.fromRows, it's actually table.toRows function, because we want to convert every single value into a list. So table.toRows, apologize for that. Now we have seen that the list contains the table, the text itself, and the table itself. Now this is the formula that is going to fit right well within our table.partition. So I'm going to cut it right here. I'm going to delete this particular step. I don't need it at the moment. This was just a temporary step. In the table.fromPartitions formula, I'm going to feed that table.toRows function. If I do that, you can see that all of the columns have been combined. This is beautiful. It has also created a new column called query name with the two queries, which is table 1 and table 2, and that is just so amazing. A lot of times while designing sophisticated queries, you'll find yourself in a need to extract an intermediary step of the query. Not the last step, but an intermediary step. Take a look at it. So at the moment in my query, up until now, we have created 4 steps so far. But perhaps if I reference query 1 into any other query, the query step that is going to pulled and the result that you will see is the result of the last step, and none of the other steps are going to be there. And I would want to perhaps maybe pull apart the converted to table step. This is the step that I would want, and that's what I would like to work with. So I'm trying to reference an intermediary step of the query called query 1. How do I do that? Now, what I'm going to do is temporarily store the value of this particular step in the last step and then pull it apart. Let me just show you how. So I'm going to go to the combine step. In the combine step, I'm going to go ahead and write the meta keyword. So meta, that means remember an information that I'm giving it to you, and I will pull it apart when I need it. So meta, and in the meta, I'm going to declare a record, and in the record, I will say that the step that I want is nothing but this particular step converted to table. And the way we reference the step in case there are spaces in here is something like this. So I'm just going to start the hash sign and convert it to table appears like right here, and I press enter. Nothing really changes. The query is still the very same query. It's just that I have asked this step to memorize or remember the step, which is called converted to table, and stored that in the column name called step using the meta keyword. That's it. Now I'm going to go ahead and right click and make a new query. So other sources and create a blank query. This is query number 2. Now, sure enough, when I say equals to query number 1, which is this particular query, because I said you are going to see the last step, you obviously see the last step. So this particular step right here, which is combine, is the step that you see in query number 2, obviously. But like I said, in the last step of this particular query, we created a meta and stored one of the intermediary steps. Now is the time to pull that apart. So I go in this particular step and I say that, hey, in the last step, which is appearing right here in front of me, I stored something called as a meta, and I would want to pull that out. The way that you pull that out is by using the function called value.metadata, and I can start the bracket, and value.metadata is going to pull apart the meta stored in which query? Query 1 in the last step, of course. So query 1, and I press enter. Sure enough, I created a step called a step, like a column called a step, and I can pull that apart. So I can say, hey, please go to this column called step, and I press enter, and this gives me one of the intermediary steps of this particular query without this query being broken apart. So this is a nice and neat way in case you want to pull out an intermediary step from any other query, and I hope you like that. Let's move on to our next trick. In trick number 4, I'm going to teach you how do you replace your long if statements with a very neat double question mark in case you're trying to compare that with a null. Super interesting, super practical. Take a look. So I've got this simple data, which is where I have months, units, and the price. And at times the units could be null. This simply means, assuming this is just one single unit, we have a system and the system throws an error because I'm creating a Power Query case. Null means one. That's what I mean. So in this particular scenario, what I'd like to do is I'd like to find the sales, and units into price is what I would like to do, with the condition to check against the null value, right? So how do we do that? I'm going to go ahead and in the add columns tab, create a custom column. And in the custom column, if I were to do it the usual way, I'll have to check against using an if condition that are you a null or not. If you are a null, then give you 1, and 1 multiplied by 5 or whatever value is going to give you the units. Well, how do you do that in a shorter way without writing the long-wielded if? Well, what you can do is you can reference the units column like you would do. And in this particular thing, since you are exclusively comparing the units with a check called the null value, what you can do is you can put in the double question mark. Now, this simply means check the units against a null. And after the double question mark, if you write anything, in case the units is a null, it is going to give you that particular value. So if I just write 1 here, I'm going to get either the units, which is this one or this one. If it's a null, I'm going to get the value 1. And that's it. I click on OK and I get 1, 10, and 20. Sure enough, I can go back and I can say whatever this is, I want to multiply that with the price. And that is my simple and neat and clean code without writing the long if that works against the null value check. I hope you like that. Let's move on to the next trick. In this entire tutorial so far, we have discussed 4 tricks, and you must have seen me writing different formulas, and within those formulas you must have seen me writing different sort of brackets. Sometimes I use a curly bracket, sometimes I use a square bracket, and you must be wondering that what is the reason and how do you decide what bracket to use when and where? Let me demystify the brackets for you in Power Query. There are a ton of brackets. Almost all the brackets that we can see it on the keyboard are there in Power Query. Let me demystify them for you. So the trick is that if you are having a table in front of you, if you want to move right on the table, the brackets that you use are the square brackets. And if you are in the table and you want to move down in the table, the brackets that you use are the curly brackets, right? Consider that as curly, howsoever they are. Now, here is how it works. So I'm going to make a new step in the query right here. And you can see that the source, which is nothing but the previous step, is actually this entire table that we can see it right in front of us. Now, let's just say that in this particular table, I want to move right. So my direction of movement is towards here, and I want to pull apart the customer column. So if I write the table and if I just write customer, this is not going to work because when I'm moving right in the table, the brackets that I want to use to pull apart that column is nothing but the square bracket. And if I do that, this is going to work just fine. And I have been able to extract the customer column in the form of a list. That's how this works. Now, at the moment, we have gotten to a list. And let's just say now the only place to move, because lists can just have one columnar data, and the only place to move within the list is downwards. And perhaps I want to, let's say, go to the 6th row right here. Now in Power Query, counting starts with 0. So this technically is the 5th row and not the 6th row. So what I can do is I can now, because I want to go down, I can use the curly bracket and I can say row number 5, and this will actually pull apart that particular value. You can also change the order in which we have written this, and that will still go to work. So if I cancel all of that out and I press enter, I'm back at my source table. Now let's just say that I want to move to the 6th row first, which is this particular row. So I can say something like, hey, here's a table, and in the table I'm trying to move down. So I can say something like, hey, in the table, that is my 5th row, which is technically the 6th row. I press enter, and because you went to the 6th row, and row is nothing but the entire row of the data, what you get is nothing but a record. And although the record seems this particular way, like vertical, but it is actually horizontal. So if you imagine this is something like date, which is the first column, and the value right here, and the sales rep, which is the second column, and the value right here. So this is technically this way. It's just shown in Power Query this particular way. Now, if the record is technically horizontal, then now the only position that I can move is towards the right. And now if I want to, let's say, extract the customer column, I can just write the square bracket and I can say that I want to extract the customer, and now you have extracted the value of the customer. So just remember the big rule, which is moving right, use the square bracket, moving down, use the curly bracket. And that's how you demystify a lot of bracket problems in Power Query. Trick number 6, and also to do with brackets, but used in a special way called lookup operators in Power Query. Let me teach you how that is. And Power Query natively uses this a lot, but perhaps you have not noticed it. And you can also use this in your other kind of work. Please take a look. So if you take a look at the current source step, the current source step is made up of a bunch of brackets that you can directly take a look right here. And let me help you demystify that and what it means and how can you use it. So at the onset, if you take a look, excel.currentWorkbook is the function which is used. So I'm just going to delete everything after this particular function and let the brackets remain because the function is empty. There is nothing that you put in inside of that. If I now press enter, what this technically does is it takes a look at your current workbook, brings all the named ranges and the tables right here, and you can take a look at all of that. Now, at the moment in my current Excel file, I just have one table called pivot source. There could have been multiple tables as well, which were right here. And then this is the content of the particular table. Now, here comes navigation. A lot of times when you're working with tables and stuff like that, you obviously cannot have the same table name. So what this brings is an opportunity to go to a certain row. So that means I can travel like this by the name of the value. So if I just go to this particular column, I can say that, hey, why don't you stop in the name column where the value is pivot source? I'm not saying that why don't you stop at the first row or the second row or the third row like you would expect, but I am saying that, hey, why don't you stop when you find the value called pivot source? So it's kind of a lookup operator that we are doing. So how do you do that? If you were doing it in the way that I just described, you would do curly bracket, and within the curly brackets, this is the first row, which is the 0th row. I'm going to write 0, and this is going to pull apart this particular thing as a record, and this has pull apart a record. Now you are hard coding the value to be a 0. Instead, what I can say something like is this. I'm still going to use the curly bracket, but within the curly bracket, I'm not going to write the 0. Instead, I'm going to write a lookup operator. And the way that you write a lookup operator is within a record or a square bracket. So I'm going to initiate a square bracket. I'm going to mention the name of the column, which is name, of course. So I will say name, and I will write equals to, then I will write the value. So you can see that the value is nothing but pivot source. And once I do mention that, you will have to find the subtlety in this. The name of the column doesn't have any quotation marks whatsoever, but the value is definitely in the quotation marks. Now, this is actually going to search this particular column with the value that you have provided. Note that in case it finds multiple values, this is going to give you an error. So just be sure that you have one single value. In case you have multiple columns to search for, you can just put in a comma right here and just give another column as the value search. And that combination of multiple values searched for should technically give you one single value found. Now, once we have found a record is nothing but a horizontal display of the data, although it seems vertical, but in this particular thing, I would want to go to the first column, which is I want to move to the right, and the name of the column is content, and then we can just write the content column right here. And that is how Power Query actually navigates to that particular step. You might have seen the navigation step, and that is nothing but navigating to one of the steps inside of the table that you have, and that is nothing but lookup operator. Let's move on to my last trick, which is absolutely phenomenal. The final trick: how do you create a central repository of the functions on the web that you can reuse it over and over again? Let me help you understand. Let's just say that you have a couple of custom functions in Power Query that you have built that you use very, very often to carry out certain special operations, cleaning operations in your query. One such function could be an Excel-like trim function, which is not there in Power Query. And here is the code for that. So if you use this particular code, what you will be able to do is perform Excel-like trim, which is not there in Power Query. And you have got it as a function. You take this, store this inside of Power Query, convert it into a function, and you start working. The only problem is that that particular function that you have stored inside of Power Query is only available in that instance or that file that you're working with, either an Excel file or a Power BI file. Can you store this function somewhere on the web and call it from there? Let me show you how that is done. So I took that particular text file and I put that on a SharePoint site of mine right here, and within which I created a test m function, and I stored that function as a text file right here. Now you can have as many functions right here, and now what we're going to do is we're going to connect our SharePoint, which is this particular thing, and call this particular folder and call all the functions and use the ones that we like. And now because it's stored on the web, you can use it in as many queries as possible without actually duplicating the functions over and over again. Now you have a single place in case you want to make a change to any function. You have a single place to make the change into the function, and then it is going to replicate all of that. That is also a bit dangerous, but then you have now a way to store all the functions in one single place. Let's go. So to begin with, I'm going to create a blank query within which in the formula tab, I'm going to use the formula called SharePoint.files and stick in the path of my SharePoint right here. At the onset, it might ask you to authenticate, and once you authenticate, you're going to take a look at all the files inside of SharePoint right here. Now, sure enough, I want to navigate to a certain folder within the SharePoint, so I can move to the right, which is where I have the folder path. And if I remember correctly, one of the words was test in my folder name. I'm going to click on OK, and that's where I have my test m functions folder loaded. Since I just have one single text file, all that I am left with is one single row. If there were many, I would have many functions right here. Now, the thing is, what I want to do is I want to take this particular text file, which is right here, and I want to extract the text from it. That's my first thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start transforming this particular column with the name where PQ trim fx is the text. So we're going to use the lookup operator trick. So let's just start. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this for a quick second, and we will use that in just a second. I'm going to now write a function within which I will transform this binary into a readable text format. How do I do that? I'm going to make a new step. I'm going to say, hey, this is a binary, not readable by Power Query. Let me just try to make it readable. So I'm going to say table.transform columns. I'm going to start the bracket. Table.transform columns asks you, hey, which table are you trying to work with? I'm trying to work with the previous table, which is right here. And the column that I'm trying to transform is the content column, which is where I would like to extract the binary and convert it into a readable format. How do I do that? I'm going to put in a comma and mention the name of the column, which is nothing but the content column. And the formula that can read the binary, which is a text file, could also be csv.document, but we are going to use a different function which is called lines.binary. So I'm going to use something called as lines.binary.fromBinary. I'm going to use that, close the bracket and press enter, and you're going to see that this has been transformed into a list, and that is where all of the text of that particular function. Now we're going to use the lookup operator. So we're going to say that here is a table. This one is a table, and all of this is a table. In this table, I would want you to go ahead and extract this, where the name equals to pq trim fx, and I'm going to maybe start the curly bracket, start the square bracket, where the name is equals to the name that I just copied a while ago, and I'm going to close the bracket. And from this particular table, I'd like to extract the content column. So I'm just going to maybe put in the square bracket and extract the content column right here. Press enter, and the content column is extracted. Now we have been able to extract the function, and the function is appearing as a list right here. Now I want to convert this into a text so that I can start using it. I'm going to make another step and call this as my fx as list. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead in this particular step and combine all the text values of the list. So I'm going to say text.combine. Now the function text.combine asks you as the first part as a list. That means give me multiple texts to combine, but they should be in the form of list. Do you have a list? Sure enough, we have a list. And what is your separator after all of these texts are combined? So my separator is nothing but another line, another line, another line, and another line. How do I do a line separator? I'm going to use the line feed as the delimiter. And the way to use that is that you write the inverted commas, write the hash sign, in the brackets use the line feed, close the bracket and press enter, and this is now extracted as a text. Now you must be wondering, this is no good. What I have just done is I have copy pasted the text from the text notepad into Power Query here. This is not a function. This is just a piece of text. Now we will convert that into a function, and here is the trick that allows you to do that. I'm going to go ahead and call this as my fx as text, and now I'm going to maybe start the bracket, and I'm going to say, hey, I am trying to evaluate an expression. So expression.evaluate. I will start the bracket. It says give me the expression that you're trying to evaluate, which is fx as text, and then it says, hey, what environment would you like to do that in? So the environment is Power Query's environment, and you can kind of load that up using the shared keyword. So shared, shared keyword. Now I'm saying that this text would be utilized in the shared keyword, which is where you will have all the Power Query functions, all of the documentation, all of that. Now if I press enter, this has been transformed into a function. Let's just call this as my trim fx. This is coming right off from SharePoint. Now if I happen to write any particular text right here, so I'm saying hello space, my name is Chandeep. Now what I would want in this particular function is that all of this space which is in between the text should be removed. By default, that is not removed by Power Query. If I click on invoke, and you can see that all of that space is gone, and we have used trim fx, which is actually coming off from my SharePoint. And you can have as many functions stored in that, and you can pull it apart and make use of that from a central repository. Just as the way that you have learned about 7 awesome tricks in Power Query, I want to teach you the most important functions in the DAX language in a categorical manner that you will love a lot. And that is the next video that I'm going to be seeing you in. Cheers.